Hello, everybody. Welcome into our Pella Windows Postgame Show, live on the field at Bobby Dodd Stadium, where Georgia has beaten Georgia Tech 52-7. We will talk over the course of our program about how all of this goes down, how Georgia overcame, frankly, a good bit of adversity, somewhat surprising level of play from Georgia in the second quarter. Dogs overcome that, go on to get the win. We'll take a look at a few of the stats there as well. But, Jeff, let me begin with this, if you don't mind. By the way, Jeff Sintel, Brandon Adams, as a part of our Pella Windows postgame show. Let me begin with Kirby Smart a moment ago. Obviously, the most significant moment of the game from a Georgia fan standpoint is DeAndre Swift leaving the game, appeared to be holding his shoulder. Kirby Smart has called that a shoulder contusion and said that he thinks that Swift is going to be, in his words, going to be fine. Even when going so far as to say at one point in time during the post-game press conference that maybe Swift could have come back in the game today if Georgia needed him to. Now, we're entering into an SEC championship week where there's going to be a great deal of gamesmanship on both sides, and Smart's not necessarily obligated to be completely forthcoming about the injury to Swift. But certainly I didn't hear anything from any Georgia player today that necessarily refuted what Smart said there. So at least based on the face value commentary from Kirby Smart, which literally took place just across the field inside the Georgia locker room no less than about 5 or 10 minutes ago, it sounds like DeAndre Swift might be okay. Certainly a hopeful tone struck by Kirby Smart in talking about the Swift injury. And I don't know that there's anything today more important than that potential piece of news there.
Yeah, I think, Brandon, you basically hit all the high notes of the story. I think it was funny before we ventured onto the flats today, Brandon, you just wanted an X something type of victory where everybody comes out clean. And there's lots of layers to this where Georgia doesn't come out clean. I think the first layer is the DeAndre Swift worry. So the vibe we were getting in the middle of the game was sort of a thumbs-up vibe that Swift was going to be okay, and that was one of the first things that Kirby Smart addressed, even went so far as to say that Swift had been dealing with shoulder contusions. That's what he called it, a shoulder contusion. Looked like his left shoulder that he'd been dealing with all season.
Yeah, so that's certainly the situation there. And obviously, it was kind of an uncharacteristic day for Swift in the fact that he contributed to two Georgia fumbles. And when that goes down and then he leaves the game with an injury, it's really a different kind of challenge for this Georgia team, because one of the things I think we've kind of grown accustomed to expecting is that Swift is among this team's most important leaders on the field, but also one of its most important vocal leaders there as well. So when he's kind of sitting over here, next to the wall on the bench, you have guys like Jay Fromm and James Cook coming over to offer some words of prayer with him. When Georgia's dealing with that, it ends up being, kind of certainly an anxiety-producing moment for fans, but you almost assume it had to be at least a little bit of that for some of the players there as well, knowing that one of your key leaders is now off the field. You don't know what's going on with him. It obviously didn't look good when the injury first occurred. He was really, really slow to get up there. It seems like maybe all is well that ends well. But my gosh, can you imagine being a Georgia player on this sideline or one of the Georgia players in this game, knowing that there's a big question mark next to maybe arguably your most important leader thus far this season? That takes the Georgia team into a weird mental place there at that moment, does it not?
I don't think it's just a leader. I mean, I'm not discrediting anything you said there because he's a distinguished leader on the team, Brandon. But that's Georgia's haymaker. That's their uppercut. That's their knockout punch that they could bring against LSU. They need DeAndre Swift to be healthy. They need DeAndre Swift to have about 25 touches, some of the best touches of the season, if not his career, against LSU. Make no mistake about it. And it's awkward, Brandon, because he comes into this game now, 2 fumbles. He leaves the game, and he Kirby Smart said he could return, but that's probably one of the lesser games that DeAndre Swift has had in his Georgia career. Reminder, this whole game was Willy Wonka from Georgia's perspective. We're going to delve into a lot of it, but you have a Rodrigo Blankenship miss. You have a muffed punt. You have Tech getting an onside kick. You have 2 DeAndre Swift fumbles. I mean, this is weird, a weird game how you can outgain an opponent by almost 500 yards, force them to punt 13 times, a new team mark for Georgia Tech in futility of one single game, 13 punts, and yet you turn the ball over so much and you still win by 45 points.
Yeah, it was really bizarre, and we'll obviously get more into that over the course of our game here today. It's our Pella Windows postgame show live here from Bobby Dodd Stadium at Grant Field. That's Jeff Sintel. My name is Brandon Adams, and of course, we're all brought to you by our friends at Pella Windows and Door. They can help equip your house with energy-efficient windows and doors, and that's important this time of year. You don't want energy escaping out your house. When you have those energy-efficient windows and doors, it could save you money on your heating bill and some of the other energy bills that you have each and every month. Pella Windows and Door can potentially add some extra savings there to you for that. So let's give you a couple ways to get in touch with them. You can currently get up to 0% APR or 40% off qualifying installations. That's an offer that's valid through January 9th. So get in touch with them by hitting them up on their website at pellasoutheast.us. The website, once again, pellasoutheast.us, or giving them a call in their Dunwoody showroom at 404-445-2979. 404-445-2979. Pella Window in Door of Georgia. It's viewed to be the best. We'll get some comments here coming up on both Facebook and YouTube as folks share their thoughts on the 52-7 Georgia victory. Let's also spend a moment here talking about the other kind of big story. Kirby Smart did confirm in the post-game press conference a moment ago what the television broadcast also talked about. I think was largely suspected when we saw Pickens playing in the early going of the third quarter, that a discipline issue kept him off the field in the first half today. I believe there was an erroneous television report that Pickens had played some in the first half. I don't believe that Pickens took a snap at all in the first half, not on special teams or anything. So that was an incorrect report by ABC. Smart does confirm, though, after the game that it was a discipline issue, team matter, that kept him off the field in the first half. And then in the second half, when really, Pickens did some good things. Obviously, he scored a touchdown, but also on another Georgia touchdown, gets into a skirmish with a Georgia Tech player. There are punches thrown. Pickens gets kicked out of the game, and Kirby Smart now says that he will be suspended for the first half of the SEC championship game. There was all kinds of debate online about whether this rule will be treated exactly like the targeting rule, where you definitely are suspended for the first half when you leave in the second half. But, man, what a newsy day for George Pickens to be disciplined for the first half, come in for the second half, show you the flashes of what makes him such an extraordinary talent, and also some of the stuff that has kind of, I think, made him a little bit of a headache in terms of the fact that he wears his emotions on his sleeve, and sometimes that kind of explodes in a big way. And today it did to the tune of some thrown punches. He wasn't the guy that started that, but it's pretty clear seeing the video that he was heavily involved after that. What's your take on what went down with Pickens here today?
Yeah, I think the first thing, Kirby kind of uttered a phrase when anybody does that where they lose their cool, they say, was it worth it? And so now Georgia fans are going to go through their minds and go, was it worth it not having your services available for the first half of the SEC championship game? I think Georgia looked like a different offense, minus Cager, when you added Pickens back into the mix in the second half. It's very disappointing, and I think Kirby Smart did a good job of just coming full circle with it and balancing out the story. Number one, he said he was disappointed by the move, but he called him a freshman. Yeah. He said it's a lot like raising children. You love your children, but your children mess up and you have to discipline your children. Even when it's so far as to say he tried to do a little bit of PR on Pickens' image he talked about how Pickens went to the Children's Hospital this week before the Georgia Tech game. He said he had as much charisma, he had as much passion, as much life with those children as any one of his Georgia Bulldogs. So he says there's some ups and downs. And again, it's what he said. That's what happens when you have a freshman. He said he loved George Pickens. He loves everything he brings to the table, his fire and passion. But obviously Georgia, I think the big clutching pearls moment for a lot of Georgia fans is there was a little uncertainty there about, is Pickens going to be gone for the first half or the SEC championship game status? And then you mix that in with Swift and what his availability would be like for the Tigers as well. And all of a sudden, Georgia's chances about putting up a great fight against LSU and Atlanta took a nosedive, but Smart was quick in his post-game briefings to kind of stabilize some of that a little bit.
Well, he certainly, though, did indicate that they won't have Pickens for the first half next week, so that's obviously not great news. And I'm going to speak as a fan here for a moment. Pickens is still my guy. What he does 95% of the time when he's doing the right stuff, which is about, the percentage of time he's doing that, you need that energy. You need that fight. You need that passion. The fact that Pickens wears his emotions on his sleeves, most of the time, the overwhelming majority of the time, that's a very good thing. And obviously, I don't love what happened to him today, but at the same time, you better believe I'm not getting rid of George Pickens because of one little incident over here in the corner of the end zone over here. That's a guy you really, really need. And, frankly, in the second half of the game against LSU, you're probably going to need him to make some big plays to have the best chance of overall winning that game. And also, I don't want to excuse away what Pickens was involved with, but there is a part, and I tweeted this during the game, can I get a ref to step in? Because you got the Tech guy who throws the first punch, and then this thing turns into like Triple G and Canelo for 5 minutes over there before any official sort of steps up and steps in. I think that situation could have been de-escalated a lot quicker if an official would have stopped staring at it and stepped over there and start pulling those guys apart. I mean, isn't that the job of the officials there? Doesn't excuse away Pickens' behavior. He threw the punch, actually threw several of them. But can I have an official step in and kind of try to bring some decorum after the tech guy did what he did?
Well, and I'm just going to balance things out here, Brandon, because I'm not going to excuse it out too much. I mean, I think
excuse it either.
I mean, that's what you're saying. Let's not be sure to excuse this out. But, I mean, the book on George Pickens has been wild, mercurial, incredible, out-of-the-box talent. But the book on George Pickens going through high school is he has issues where he runs in the red a lot. Sometimes it results in a blown engine, a blown temper. But there's got to be a fine line for George Pickens to find those brilliant and dazzling plays he makes every Saturday. But everybody champions his ball skills, how he can go up and get a ball, and his physicality. But there's a fine line there, Brendan. We've seen this against Vanderbilt. We've seen this against countless teams this year where there is some post-whistle shenanigans going on with George Pickens and somebody. Now, I know somebody can instigate it. I know he got to protect himself and all that. And sure, a referee needs to step in. But George Pickens also needs to realize is that ultimately he hurts the Georgia team when he's not available to play in the next football game.
And I hate to be a snitch, but, I mean, he was over there messing with the students, the tech students, before the thing happened in the court of the end zone. So clearly a lesson learned here for George Pickens, and obviously you hope to be able to welcome him back in a big way in the second half of the SEC championship game. You know, even talking to some Georgia officials after the Kirby Smart press conference, I pressed them on the idea of, is there any kind of appeal process for this whatsoever? And the fact of the matter is, you know, no one's exactly sure, at least the people I've talked to thus far, but it sounds like that's not the case. It sounds like Pickens will indeed be gone for the first half here.
Yeah, so here's one point to think about, because there's a little bit of yin and yang to this. Now, I'm not saying Tyler Simmons is the same type of playmaker that George Pickens is, far from it. But you're seeing a little bit more of Tyler Simmons the last couple of weeks, and that's just the thought bubble that immediately goes into my mind is how does Georgia weather what they're going to lose in the first half against LSU without Pickens? And you're seeing some increased and you're seing some accelerated and up levels in his play so far over the last few weeks.
Yeah, I'll read this to you here. And if you want to pull up some comments while I do, you know, Simmons goes 3 catches for 52 yards today, also brings in a touchdown. I thought he was one of the real bright spots for the Georgia offense, in addition to guys like James Cook, who gave you 4 carries for 30 yards today. But I thought that Simmons, a guy that's had that chemistry with Fromm because they've been together for such a long time, also brings really good speed to the table. I thought Simmons was a real bright spot. And listen, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. There are obviously a lot of moments in our comment section in the Pella Windows Postgame Show when Simmons has kind of been the subject of ire a bit. I've always felt like that was, to the degree it happened, a bit unfair. But today, for the most part, Simmons really answered those critics, and I think he's eager to also kind of step up in the place of Lawrence Cager next week, along the lines of a whole host of Georgia receivers hope to be able to do that. So I'll take these comments from you. We'll start reading a few of these here on our Pella Windows Postgame Show, give you all a chance to react to whatever you'd like to.
Yeah, and as Brandon surveys the comment stream real fast, I mean, a note, Bulldog fans, because I think Kirby Smart was even stumped by this in his postgame comments. That was Charlie Warner's first touchdown catch as a Georgia Bulldog today. He reiterated Warner how much he blocks, how much he's helped the program in so many ways. So for him to go 3-1 against Georgia Tech, not only that, but get his first career touchdown reception, that was a bright moment for the Bulldogs today.
Tanya Wilson-Dean says you got to keep your cool, speaking of Pickens, and why was the Tech player not ejected as well? So was the Tech player in this instance not ejected? Honestly, there was tons of confusion about that there as well because for whatever reason the referees' mics weren't really working, so it was kind of hard to be able to hear everything that went on. Down on the sidelines, did you get a sense of this? Was the Tech player ejected? Because the whole thing was just an insane ordeal that I thought could have been handled a lot better.
Well, you got to remember, usually it's the second man or the guy that throws several punches that's going to get the immediate ejection. I also learned that there was a cameraman that got caught up into maybe the melee of the scrum a little bit there, and that also resulted, thankfully, not in a damaged human being, but this time in a damaged camera. That was some more fallout of what happened there with Pickens.
All right, let's get a few more. Matt Talley bringing up James Cook. Other people saying that they'd like to see Cook, more involved in the offense. Don Williams says that. Was this kind of a breakout party for Cook a bit? One of the things I liked today was not just the fact that they gave him some touches, let him carrying the ball. I thought they sent James Cook in motion a lot today, which obviously I think is a real interesting offensive wrinkle that you'd like to see more of. So in addition to kind of being involved with some of the ball carriers, as a ball carrier, seeing Cook in motion as much as he was, I thought it was kind of an interesting wrinkle to add to the Georgia offense today.
Well, I got 2 quick Cook points to make. Number one, it seemed like he was maybe A lot of his biggest plays was the culture of the score. A lot of his biggest plays was the culture of the scoreboard and what the margin of the lead looked like, the current margin of victory looked like for Georgia. The second thing, Brandon, is Connor and I were noticing, and there was a couple of us guys were noticing on the sidelines, that Georgia had a good plan at times because they had Zamir White in the game and they had James Cook in the game at the same time, and they did like a fake, put it in the belly of Zamir White, draw some defensive eyes, and then throw the ball out in the flat to Cook. I thought that was a nice synergy there, using those two playmakers and keeping the defense off balance. When you're looking at with Cook, the other thing to think about him getting a little bit more increased touches, that was likely because of, one, the blowout score at the time, and then also the worries about another DeAndre Swift situation happening.
Justin Glaze talking about Jake Fromm, the effort he put forth today in terms of his accuracy. Once again, the overall completion percentage is not exactly where you want it to be. I thought Fromm made some really nice throws today. I thought the Simmons throw in the first half that set up a Georgia score was a pretty impressive throw. I mean, obviously the Pickens touchdown was wide open. I thought the Georgia offense was interesting that in the first half they really tried to get Demetrius Robertson involved. Now, it didn't always turn out the way you wanted to, but they, by my count, targeted him 6 times in the first half. So, this was a situation where, statistically speaking, the Georgia offense, even in a 52-7 game, is going to leave a little bit to be desired. But against a lesser opponent, it was kind of a reminder of what this team was doing earlier in the year against teams like Arkansas State and Vanderbilt. Georgia's, for the most part, been playing top 25, top 35 level defensive efficiency defenses the last several weeks. This was a reminder of what this Georgia team can look like when they get a chance to pick on the kinds of teams that Clemson or a team like that's playing every Saturday.
Yeah, and I think the other thing there is you saw D-Rob getting some work because he's going to be there and he's going to be there, and it's going to be necessary for him to take an increased role in this offense with Cager out. I think, another thing that, you're dropping a lot of news nuggets from Kirby Smart's post-game thoughts, and he confirmed the Cager ankle injury during this week of practice, and he said he had surgery on Friday about it. He expects a complete and full recovery. He also said, Dog fans, Dog Nation, for everybody that's getting a little hopeful, he said that Cager would be doubtful for a bowl game.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I'll let you unlock your phone here for a second. We'll get more comments here as part of our Pella Window Postgame Show. Of course, it's brought to you by our friends at Pella Window and Door. They can help equip your house with energy-efficient windows and doors. Can save you money on your heating and electrical bill here this wintertime. Always a really good thing. A couple ways for you to get in touch. How about PellaSoutheast.us? That's the website. Once again, PellaSoutheast.us. Or give them a call, and you can set up an appointment time in their Dunwoody showroom at 404-445-2979. That's 404-445-2979. Pella Window and Door of Georgia is viewed to be the best. I'll also tell you here, great offer from them, 40% off qualifying installations or 0% APR for 48 months. That offer is valid here through January the 9th, so make sure you take advantage of that with Pella Window and Door as a part of our Pella Window postgame show. More comments coming here on Facebook. We'll get some on YouTube here coming up in just a bit there as well. Eric Allen certainly excited for the SEC championship game coming up, and boy, I was glad to hear Kirby Smart talk as much about that today as he did. I thought this was really well said that, for Georgia fans who've been nervous because, last week against Texas A&M, maybe the final margin of victory is not what it's supposed to be. Some of the other games where it's, kind of been a sweat job in the fourth quarter, late against Auburn. You certainly didn't see any lacking for confidence in Kirby Smart about going into Atlanta next week and taking on LSU. And I thought this was a really good example of the coach here, Smart, setting the tone for what I really think that the approach next Saturday is supposed to be. Georgia's going to be a point spread underdog in this game. That's obviously with good reason, given the fact that LSU's, at least through 11 games, undefeated on the season. They'll play Texas A&M tonight. But for Georgia fans who've, somehow gotten, concerned, worried that somehow, their favorite team can't go step for step with LSU, you certainly didn't get any kind of indication from Kirby Smart tonight that he's worried about that or feeling that way.
No, his post-game thoughts where he's focused on the grandeur and the pageantry of the SEC championship game. He put it up there with the pinnacle of sport, at least in the games and environments that he's competed in. He says the SEC championship is something very special. And now you look at Georgia, we've mentioned some elements that are question marks. We've mentioned some elements that are verified as not as bad as most might have feared. And now you've got another example, Cager moving on, but a little bit more Simmons, a little bit more of Cook. I tell you, Brandon, for Dog Nation and the people that follow this football team, that was a precarious moment when Swift was on the ground because it looked like it was maybe an arm, maybe a wrist, maybe a hand, not just a shoulder. And you mentioned about the leadership factor. Well, he's just the core of the team. You saw Cager come out. You saw different players come out just to check on him when he was down on the ground. And thankfully, if you're just joining us and getting into the beginning, you didn't catch the beginning of our post-game show. Kirby Smart said shoulder contusion on Swift, and he said they expect him to be fine. He said DeAndre Swift had been dealing with some shoulder contusions during the course of this season, had been fighting that all year long.
Good question coming in here from Brandon Dawson. We'll get some YouTube comments here coming up in a moment. Brandon says, what kind of defense does LSU have compared to a team we've played this year? So what I'll say is, from a statistical standpoint, LSU's defense is inferior to certainly Auburn, who may be one of the better defenses in the country. I would say probably Florida as well may have, statistically speaking, a better defense than what LSU's played thus far this season. Honestly, I'm not even quite so sure a team like Missouri is not better defensively than what LSU's been here this year. Now, they've got some real talent. Obviously, a guy like Braden Fajoko, an interior defensive lineman, can be a force to deal with. That was a problem for Georgia in the 2018 game. Georgia had a hard time blocking him. They've obviously got some talent in the secondary. A lot of guys play in that group. Stingley's obviously the freshman defensive back. They have a lot of long runners. Jacoby Stevens, who a lot of Georgia fans will remember back from a recruiting cycle of years ago. They have a lot of guys that look like Stevens, very fast, tall linebackers. Grant Delpit, maybe a top 5 pick in the NFL draft coming up in 2020. So there's some talent there that hasn't quite always come together this season. A lot of folks remember the fact they gave up more than 400 yards rushing to Ole Miss just a couple of weeks ago. So, I would say that in terms of comparison to defense on the Georgia schedule, there's probably 3, maybe even 4 defenses that Georgia's played thus far this year, at least from a statistical standpoint, probably superior to LSU. Now, much the same way Georgia fans have a hope that the Georgia offense will play better when it matters most, obviously LSU fans are hoping the same thing about their defense.
Yeah, a couple of LSU thoughts here. Number one, I would maybe think, at least from the front guys up front, you got to think Kentucky's front is going to be, their in-the-box players are going to have the size and the ability that would maybe be a similar degree of difficulty to what LSU has brought to the table. But, folks, Georgia, you just witnessed a game that was a lopsided result. I think Georgia had more than 450 yards of total offense than Georgia Tech. But were there not a few new nail-chewing moments for Georgia in that one? And LSU doesn't have any easier with a degree of difficulty tonight. I would expect that to be a physical game with Texas A&M, and I would expect LSU fans, or the gentleman doing, LSU Nation Daily tonight, to be hopeful that they come out of Texas A&M game with a win and all their principal firepower still intact for the Georgia game in the SEC championship.
Matt Rukavina saying, so is DeAndre Swift okay? Just kind of reset this in the earlier portion of the show. We'll probably mention this a couple times. So Smart says that the quote here, I'm paraphrasing, is that he thinks that he will be fine. Smart even went so far as to say there's a chance that he could have come back in the game today if they needed him to, calling it a shoulder contusion. So certainly Smart really kind of striking a hopeful tone on that. By the way, I'll also mention here in the late stage of the second quarter, Alabama and Auburn right now tied at 10 in the Iron Bowl, so we'll keep our eye on that. Kind of an interesting development from the SEC. Obviously, as Alabama tries to make a case for being an at-large team in the college football playoff. Zach Dempsey says we can't give away 5 or 6 possessions against LSU and get behind. And Jeff, from that standpoint, with what happened today, where you had the weird onside kick recovery to go along with 2 turnovers, the fact that, in the first half, then Swift would add another one in the second half. The fact that all of this goes down, this was really uncharacteristic for Georgia because, for the most part, we've complained about the Georgia offense not being explosive enough. But other than the South Carolina game, it's been pretty precise. It hasn't had a lot of unforced errors. Today, to see the entire collection of blunders kind of put together in that second quarter, that was eye-opening. And obviously, if Georgia played anything close to that next Saturday against LSU, not only would Georgia lose, it would get blown out. I don't expect there to be a repeat of that performance. Don't really quite have a great explanation for what happened today. But it was odd to see Georgia become such a comedy of errors, and by comedy I mean no one was laughing, such a comedy of errors there towards the end of the half.
Well, Brandon, it's funny. I just think that's indicative of this 2019 season because you have a guy like Dominic Blaylock who puts the ball on the ground, but you look at what he does in the return game today, especially on the punt return game, Brandon. I thought that was his best game of the year where he was returning punts and getting Georgia upfield and getting positive yardage. I mean, he had one of them where he returned the ball all the way down to the Georgia 22 and that set up a Rodrigo Blankenship field goal, and it's one of those days when Rodrigo misses a field goal, everything's a little bit out the wazoo. But Brendan, this just feels like a lot of games with Georgia plays this year. There's some good, there's some not so good. There's that step on the neck moment where Georgia doesn't do that, and they end up kind of pawing and playing and going a few extra rounds with an opponent before they can put them away.
Other comments continue to come in on the subject of George Pickens. We'll get more on that. Bill Granger mentions Notori Johnson being a part of that group playing late tonight. Jeff, I know you were kind of keen eye on that, and a lot of this is related to the freshman report that you publish each week at DogNation.com. Give us a little bit of insight and kind of some of those guys that you saw extended playing time for, Notori and some other guys who got a chance to kind of be on this field today and earn a chance in front of, in some cases, their hometown. A lot of these guys are Atlanta guys, getting a chance to kind of be out there and enjoying a little time on the spotlight.
Yeah, so I thought it was interesting. Number one, you got different rules to think about, guys. Even though it's a road game, the travel roster is different because it's not an SEC opponent. That means everybody can come, and a lot of Georgia's 2019 class got their third game today, Brandon, and what I mean by that is their third game of playing eligibility that they saw in the 2019 season. Let's look at the fronts, Brandon, because you saw a Kenny McIntosh touchdown, but you also saw, I think, the line that was in there for Georgia for the balance of the fourth quarter. As you saw, you had a right tackle of Warren McClendon, your right guard was Clay Webb, your Warren Erickson was your center, then you had DeMarcus Hayes is your left guard, and then your left tackle was Xavier Truss. You flip it over to the other side of the ball, and you had Tremel Walfar, who gets into the game. I think that's his first playing time of the year. You saw Notori Johnson. You saw Bill Norton come up with almost a sack and a safety on a TFL behind the line, and saw a lot of those guys in there. You saw Robert Beal in there again as well, and Nate McBride. So that fourth quarter was largely freshman report time for DogNation.com.
It's also worth pointing out that one of the guys, not a freshman, but who did get some extended playing time, was Jamari Salyer in kind of a non-garbage time situation, coming in at left guard when the game was still very much not in doubt. So this was more than just a token substitution for Jamari Salyer. He was part of the offensive game plan today and got a chance to spell Solomon Kinley, at least for a moment.
Yeah, when I saw Jamari in there so much, I started wondering about the rotations because Hill was out for a little bit because he lost his helmet. Cade Mays moved to center. But I saw Cleveland in and out a lot. I saw Mays in and out a lot. And I don't want anybody to have a Fred Sanford moment, but I saw Ben Cleveland walking a little gingerly coming off the field today as well. So I wonder what's up with that, whether that's just a nick or something like that, or just his shoe not fitting right. But that's another one you wait and wonder on about what's going on this week. And we can almost assume that it will be a week of closed practices for Georgia, getting ready for LSU.
Let me also bring up a comment that Peter Jeffrey Wilson made a moment ago, talking about the situation with George Pickens, saying, come on, guys, he's just a freshman. Last year was in high school. Why don't you cut him some slack? And I think that's actually pretty well said here. While it's fair, and Kirby Smart talked about this himself, while it's fair to kind of say, hey, Pickens crossed a line today that can't be crossed. He hurt his team by being as aggressive as he was. The fact of the matter is Georgia wouldn't have much of a chance of making the college football playoff if it wasn't for George Pickens, hopefully getting a chance to come in and play in the second half against LSU, and then hopefully in games beyond that. Pickens is still a really important part of this. So with a guy like this who's this young and who's this talented, and in some cases this emotional, you take the good and you take the bad and you kind of take it all together. Almost kind of broke off into a Facts of Life song there. But the point is that's what you do. I think you appreciate all of it when it comes to Pickens, and you just sort of work to help him handle those emotions a bit better. That's a challenge that he's dealing with. I don't think there's any doubt about that at all. By the way, we're now 17-17, I guess, when it comes to Alabama and Auburn right now. So kind of a fun thing kind of working its way through there as we continue to kind of follow all of that. Pella Windows Postgame Show kind of popping over here on YouTube for a moment. Thank you, Jeff Sintel. Appreciate you doing that. Let's find out what folks are saying on YouTube. We'll kind of work our way here. So John Adams says Auburn gets a pick six. So Mac Jones turning the ball over there. That's interesting to think about. Jethro Smith, Caleb Hurto kind of talking about what could happen to Alabama in terms of getting that free pass in the college football playoff. Obviously, that happened in 2017, and those that can remember back to the BCS era of 2011 remember that happening as well. I don't know that this Alabama team, though, is getting that same level of benefit of doubt right now from the committee. I hint some skepticism from the group when they talk about the Crimson Tide right now. So, the idea that Alabama would have needed a convincing win to do that against Auburn. Obviously, there's a lot of football left to play. But I said last week, I didn't think Alabama was good enough to go on the road and get a convincing win against Auburn. Good enough to win the game. They may still do that. Good enough to flex in this game. I told you last week I didn't think that was going to happen.
Yeah, so, I just don't think it happens, Brandon, without Tua, because they lose that star power. They lose that swagger that they can go in and play with anybody, no matter what they do. And I think Bama just returns a kickoff in that game. So they're going back and forth in that element. It's interesting, Brandon, how the Iron Bowl looks a lot different than how Georgia was kind of controlling Auburn for 3 quarters, 21-0, with its defense and its suffocating pressure. You got a lot of things to think about from this game as well. Monty Rice with 8 tackles today. He leads the Georgia defense. The second and third third leading tackler was a tie. That was Nolan Smith and N'Kobe Dean, a couple of 5-stars looking very composed, looking very solid and disciplined in what they're going about and doing, and they're becoming a bigger and bigger part of that Georgia defense.
Keith Simmons says on YouTube, at some point Pickens has to grow up or move on, not acceptable. No one's going to say it's acceptable what George Pickens did, but at the same time, no one's going to say, hey, young man, you get one more chance to get yourself together or you're going to move on. No. What you're going to say to a guy like George Pickens is, hey, what you did today is not acceptable, and we're going to give you lots of help and lots of rope to sort of figure out how to manage your emotions on a game better than this, because what George Pickens has cannot be taught. A little bit of a more calm demeanor, that's the kind of thing that you can teach anyone. But you can't teach people to kind of go get footballs the way that George Pickens can. So will he get lots of, I don't want to say leniency, but lots of patience from Kirby Smart in terms of dealing with some of the things that he's working with from kind of a demeanor standpoint? Yes, he will, because that's how good of a player he is.
Yeah, I think the main thing is, we need to reiterate he's just a freshman. Kirby Smart said that there was some positive moments there for him this week in visiting the children and everything else, man. But I think I'm just going to try and make a very clear statement on George Pickens. I think he can be as good as he wants to be, as good as any receiver playing football, provided he gets those emotions in check. And I think that would be the point of growth for the Georgia program, for Cortez Hankton, for Kirby Smart, and everybody that's going to try and be a positive influence in his life. George Pickens has some phenomenal moments, but if he can ever keep that in check and just internalize a lot of that fire that burns within his belly, he can be a phenomenal player. But this is one of those things, you can say this is a growth moment. He'll learn from this, especially having to sit out the first half of the LSU game. But you also got to remember, Brennan, I think the disappointing thing for in this whole situation is he was already facing an internal team matter suspension where he sits out the first half, and then he just kind of goes back and gets himself in a red card situation in the middle of the football game.
A couple more comments here. I'm going to get VTW on Fromm in a moment. Beth Skinner on the subject of the DeAndre Swift fumbles that were today an impact of the previous shoulder contusions that Smart had said that Swift had been dealing with. I want to say on that first fumble, this happens in football. He's got the ball tucked. I'm obviously watching from the press box, so I'm watching from a long way away. But he's got the ball tucked. The defender comes in and just puts that hat right there in the football. That's gonna happen sometimes in football. I don't even know. I think it's a degree of just luck as well. Sometimes you make the tackle and the helmet goes exactly where it needs to go. On the second fumble, I don't know if it's injury related or not. You could certainly make a case that you could switch the ball into the other hand there at that point in time.
Well, you remember the play, though. That was a wildcat look where they flexed. It was a wildcat look where they flexed Fromm out to the side and gave DeAndre Swift the play on the toss, and he just kind of got caught up in things. And I want to say, Connor, I can't remember any other fumbles for DeAndre Swift this year. You have to look at it. He hasn't had a history of fumbling whatsoever in his Georgia career. And I think maybe some of the context of your point, hits home. It's like sometimes the defender just makes a play and puts his hat on a hat.
Yeah, if a hat goes on a football when Swift's running full speed, the ball's just going to come out. And fortunately, that kind of thing just doesn't happen very much. VTW and the subject of Fromm's confidence. And admittedly, after last Saturday, I spent some time wondering if the confidence of Jake Fromm might not be a bit shaken, and if the body language was not quite what you wanted to see. And maybe some of our commenters are saying that they kind of saw some of that in the first half of today's game there as well. Georgia got a chance to exhale in the second half of this game. Stetson Bennett even got to come in and play. Even though statistically it wasn't a dazzling performance by Jake Fromm, does this improve the body language for Fromm? Does this improve the confidence for Fromm if it was lacking on the basis of the fact that last few weeks it's just been kind of not what we've come to expect from number 11?
Well, let's look at your numbers, Brandon. I know Georgia was trying to do a little bit more, trying to hit Eli Wolf on some different type routes. They were trying to feed the ball into Demetrius Robertson. But, Brandon, you have 14 completions. You have 4 touchdowns. You also take those 14 completions and turn them into 254 yards. 29 attempts, 254 yards. So he's right at about that 8.5 yards per attempt. I just think he needed to have a game like this going into LSU, where I did think his third quarter body language and his second half performance was an up note for his day-to-day against Georgia Tech.
Mike Browning says, let's talk about the defense. I don't care about style points. I care about wins. And this was obviously a defensive performance very much in keeping with what we've come to expect from Georgia all season long. And really, it's kind of funny. It's almost like there's this demented storyline of how many tough spots can the Georgia defense be put in this year, and how do they find a way to kind of get out of it. It's almost like a James Bond type thing at some point in time. Today on the field a lot to end the second quarter, to the point where you had to think that the Georgia defenders were growing tired. Now, Georgia plays a lot of guys, but when you're on the field as much as they were there because of the turnovers and the onside kick, they were certainly showing some signs of that fatigue. Touchdown gets scored on kind of a short field. But they keep responding to that challenge, keep answering that bell all day long, to even when Georgia's playing kind of a messy brand of football in the first half, there was never a moment when you thought it might be conceivable that Georgia could lose, just because of how solid and as advertised this Georgia defense turns out to be each and every time.
Yeah, let me hit on a couple of notes right here, Brandon. I want to point out, make sure we cover all of our bases here. Georgia allows Georgia Tech 139 total yards of offense. They go 5 out of 21 through the air for 40 yards. 37 carries for 99 yards. Tech only has 7 first downs in the game. Georgia puts up 26. And, Brandon, let's look at the worst performance Georgia this year. They were way on the other end of the turnover battle. Everybody knows that 4-0 goose egg against South Carolina. Well, today Georgia was 3-0 in turnover margin. They were -3 again in turnover margin against Georgia Tech. And it really becomes a matter of a moot point when you look at it. We mentioned at one of the middle segments of our broadcast tonight how Georgia forced Tech to punt the ball 13 times. That is an all-time record for a single game in the history of Georgia Tech football. And I thought that was a snarky moment for Kirby Smart to end it. Someone asked him about it, how he felt about his defense, forcing Georgia Tech to punt 13 times. And I think I'll let you share that with the audience about how Kirby Smart felt about that.
He said, good for them, and he walked off the stage. And that was a perfect way to end the post-game press conference of Kirby Smart. All about the waves brings up an interesting point about the Georgia offense going against LSU next Saturday. And he says that, he wants to see a more aggressive version of the Georgia defense, for lack of a better way of saying that. And that's obviously not been what Georgia's been doing the last few weeks. The preseason conversation of havoc rate and all of those things, and the way in which players would kind of define it on cue every time it came up. Somewhere around the midway point or so of the season, Georgia, for the most part, stopped talking about havoc rate, and the best I can tell, playing with a defensive game plan right now about more containment and about, limiting yards, limiting points, not going to be quite so aggressive. However, I think there's a really good chance that in spots next Saturday, you may see Georgia call a defensive game plan more aggressive than it has been the last few weeks. I just think that some of what you do to stop Joe Burrow is put as many hands in passing lanes as possible. But also other times, some of what you do is to keep him off balance with a well-timed pass rush or well-timed blitz. I do think for Georgia fans who just haven't seen as aggressive of a defensive game plan, I think next Saturday against LSU, I think the nature of the opponent forces you to be more aggressive from a call standpoint, from a scheme standpoint, than Georgia has been against most of the teams it's played thus far this season.
Yeah, I think, Brendan, I'm going to maybe sound a little bit too optimistic here in our Pella postgame show, but how do you deal with a Heisman Trophy quarterback? You pressure him, you frustrate him, you send guys at him. Now, sure, Joe Burrow's been a blitz beater all season long, but the difference here is, or maybe the way Georgia will come after him with their controlled rush lanes, is they're going to harass him. They're going to not give him room to run, and they're going to hem him in there. Georgia, it's not like Georgia's going to be foreign with having to deal with a Heisman Trophy level quarterback who likes to sling it around. In a lot of ways, this defensive test will look a little bit like Oklahoma in the Rose Bowl. Now, certainly Georgia has different players. There's no Roquan Smith on the field. But I think by and large, Georgia's secondary, the secondary that survived Baker Mayfield in Oklahoma, is a lot better this season. It's a lot better than the one that went against Baker Mayfield and all his receivers in the Rose Bowl.
I think the one difference between Burrow and Mayfield may be that while Mayfield was mobile at keeping plays alive, I think you see Burrow at times cut up, try to get positive yardage. He certainly ran for a lot against Georgia in 2018. I think that's one of the reasons why you can't go all out with a lot of blitz pressure, because you do have to be mindful of the fact that Burrow will step into that pressure and then look to gain positive yards with his legs. The other thing that's interesting with the 2017 Oklahoma comparison is one of the things that made Oklahoma dangerous in that game was not so much Mayfield and the terrific wide receivers, as the fact that you had Rodney Anderson and Sermon, the kid from Georgia, pretty successful job of running the ball in the first half there for the Sooners. LSU, as the season's progressed, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but my sense sense of kind of watching them from afar is they're getting better running as the season goes along, and Clyde Edwards-Helaire, kind of the veteran running back, has been one of the guys that's really stepped up there. So Georgia going to be forced one way or another, either because it blitzes or because it's putting guys with nickel and dime coverage and pass coverage. You're going to be forced to stop the run next Saturday with kind of a limited number of guys on the field dedicated to that task. It's a Jordan Davis game. It's a Monty Rice game. It's guys like that. And so for as much attention we're going to give Jamar Chase and Terrace Marshall and all those receivers, making sure that you don't allow LSU to be both left and right-handed, I think is as much a part of this storyline next Saturday as anything. You've got to force them to throw the ball. You can't give them the throw and the run.
I got 4 players. I got 5 players, and I'm not going to try to name the whole defense. But I think you mentioned what kind of game this is. I think this is a Richard LeCounte, a J.R. Reed game on the back end. But maybe in the midst of things, in those intermediate routes, I think it's going to be a huge game for Eric Stokes, Tyson Campbell, DJ Daniel, the way Georgia built depth through that injury to maybe be able to match up and shadow those receivers. And you also got to find some semblance of that great game that Azeez Ojulari consistently putting pressure on the quarterback without having to go with rip moves and swim moves and twists and a lot of exotic things. I think that's going to be crucial for Georgia. And I think the recipe there, folks, you're going to hear it a million times this week, is find a way to keep LSU around 50 yards on the ground and about 20, 25 carries, and then deal with whatever Burrow and his boys can deal with you through the air.
By the way, can you hold this for a second? I'm getting roasted in our YouTube comment section. Listen, I'm pretty tall. As long as I'm standing up tall, nobody can see that I do have a bald spot on my head. But the problem is it's hard to do the show standing up, look down and read comments without showing people the fact that I've got Lake Lanier on the top of my head right here.
Come on, Brandon.
Like I'm 6'2". As long as I'm standing up like this, like nobody knows. But once I start doing this deal right here, everybody sees. So listen.
That's outside noise, man. Stay focused on Pella postgame, man. That's outside noise. Keep going through the business of talking about Georgia Tech, and LSU.
But what you got to kind of understand, though, here is you got to understand that I am nothing if not a humble servant here. So I'll allow people to make fun of the fact that, yes, even though I'm sort of well coiffed here in the front. What's the old thing they used to say about mullets? That was like business in the front, party in the back. Like, I don't know what my version of that is, but it's like, it's something in the front and something quite different in the back here. So that is indeed the case. And by the way, speaking of that, is our Pella Window Postgame Show. We'll get a chance to speak to Connor Riley before we're done here in a moment. Let me also remind you about our friends at Pella Window and Door of Georgia. They can provide your house with energy-efficient windows and doors, and that's a good thing. You can end up saving a whole lot of money. I'll just kind of squeeze in here, give Connor a chance to kind of dive into all of this. And there's a couple different ways for you to get in touch with them and a couple great offers to take advantage of. You can currently get 40% off qualifying installations or 0% APR for the next 48 months, but you got to act now to take advantage of that. That offer only good through January the 9th. So here's the website, pellasoutheast.us. That's pellasoutheast.us, or you can give them a call in their Dunwoody showroom at 404-445-2979. That's 404-445-2979. Pella Window and Door, Georgia is viewed to be the best. I'll get some more of those comments here coming up in a moment. Alabama has taken a 24-17 lead over Auburn with about 73 seconds to go in the first half. So we're kind of coming up on halftime and a lot of points thus far in the Iron Bowl. One way or another, somebody's defense isn't quite as advertised. The Auburn, I guess, defense having a little bit of trouble here. By the way, Connor Riley is part of the Dog Nation team. We'll bring him in on the conversation.
Well, I do know that Jalen Waddle, fastest kid alive, had a 98-yard kickoff return in that game, which certainly helps. And then Auburn had a pick six earlier in that game. So those point numbers are a little inflated because of the defense and special teams there.
Najee Harris, 14 carries, 94 yards, and a touchdown against Auburn's defense already in the first half.
Yeah, so we'll keep our eye on the Iron Bowl and obviously remind you that LSU, Georgia's opponent next Saturday, as you already know, they get a chance to host Texas A&M tonight in its regular season finale. The Tigers will be going battle there. 17-point favorite. A little bit of bad blood between those two teams stemming from the 74-72 long marathon overtime thriller from a year ago. But we'll kind of put that aside for a moment. Connor, let's go back to Georgia Tech here for a moment. So for the folks who are just joining us, I think the most important news is that Kirby Smart tried to kind of put as happy a face as he could on the DeAndre Swift shoulder contusion, he called that, saying that he thinks he'll be fine. we're forced to take Smart at his word, but obviously going in the SEC championship game, gamesmanship could be a part of the conversation there. What did you make of the way that Smart spoke about it? And we also had a chance to ask several players about it. What did you make of the overall post-game conversation about Swift's status?
Yeah, I mean, Kirby was asked, do you feel maybe relieved or lucky that the injury is what he thinks it is, and he brushed that aside. I do think that it's telling that he didn't go back into the locker room. He was on the sideline there with teammates. He stayed out the entire time, was chatting with various team members, spent a lot of time talking with Richard LeCounte. James Cook and Jake Fromm both came up, so I had a little prayer session there with him. I'm not a doctor. It's very important to note that I'm not a doctor in any stretch of the mean. I'm terrified and extremely squeamish of blood. But I do think that while Swift might be a little compromised next week, I do sort of still expect to see him play. It is worth noting it is an upper body injury, not a lower body injury. And with a guy who plays and is as dynamic as Swift is, I think that's sort of where your greater concern might be.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good point.
Another point, wouldn't it have to be a shoulder for a Georgia playmaker offensively, Brandon? Shoulders that have stymied this offense all season long, the Lawrence Cager shoulder especially.
So obviously good news from Kirby Smart there to the extent that it could be, but that's the kind of story we'll be following closely here this week. And then on the George Pickens thing, Connor, what Pickens did today was wrong, and he's going to be punished for that. In fact, he was already serving a punishment at the beginning of this game. And yet, I'm not turning my back on George Pickens. I'm not selling any of my Pickens stock. I think it's way easier to put a little calmness into a fighter than it is putting some fight into a guy that doesn't want to fight. From that standpoint, Pickens is still my guy. And you know what? If you're going to get in a fight against Tech, at least he won.
Did you see the replay of it where he literally just threw the guy into the wall?
Yeah.
Kind of funny, but it's not what you want. And Jeff and I, and you've have seen this as well. This has been coming, not to the extent that it exploded today, but this is the kind of player Pickens has been all year. He's been chippy with defensive backs. He just two plays before, he was chirping with Trey Swilling. They take him out for a play, and I'm standing 20 feet away. I can tell it's getting contentious between the two of them. Dominic Blaylock scores a touchdown. I don't think anyone knows or remembers that literally as soon as he catches it, we all turn our heads to the corner, and there is Pickens taking Swilling into a wall there. But I think you just saw in the first half and third quarters today how big Pickens can be to this offense. Georgia offense looked very sluggish, inaccurate, just a bit off here and there in that first half when he was suspended due to a violation of team rules, I believe is how Kirby sort of put it there. And then he comes out, he catches a touchdown pass in the third quarter, and the Georgia offense looks completely opened up, looks a lot more confident. They're willing to move the ball and spread it around, and it doesn't seem like they're keying on one or two guys. And then he goes and gets ejected and is in all likelihood not going to be able to play for the first half next week.
Mike Gay brings up a good point. Jeff, you're far older than Connor and I are, so you may be able to speak to this.
I also have a full head of hair up here too. No Lake Lanier moments right there.
Mike Gay comparing this to the DeAndre Swift injury to the one that Herschel Walker dealt with in the 1981 Sugar Bowl. In all seriousness, I guess there is a little bit of interesting symmetry there for that.
Well, I think Herschel had 36 carries in the Sugar Bowl, and his shoulder kept popping in and out, and they kept putting it back in and back out and back.
My prediction: DeAndre Swift will not have 36 carries next Saturday. How about that for a hot take?
And if he has 36 carries, I would imagine Georgia would have great things going on with 36 DeAndre Swift carries. First of all, for them to have the ability to put the ball in his belly 36 times would mean they are definitely controlling that football game.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Clint Haynes said that as a pro wrestling fan, I kind of like what went on over there. Listen, now I can't condone it, but listen.
Pickens won the fight.
Yeah, look. If you're gonna drag me to this conversation, I'm gonna tell you the truth. You got a loser team doing whatever it can do to kind of get on Georgia's nerves here, and Pickens responded to it. It's the last time he'll make that mistake. But make no mistake about it, the only thing left for Tech to do is try to be a thorn in Georgia's side because they couldn't be a competitor on the field, and that's just kind of the way that goes down.
Boy, aren't you glad Paul Johnson isn't coaching this team anymore? This Georgia Tech team was by far, I think, the worst team Georgia had played this year.
I don't think it's close. Honestly, on a neutral field, I think that Tech and Arkansas State would be a pretty interesting game.
I don't know. I think Arkansas State could beat the Citadel.
I hope everybody noticed as well. You had Jeff Collins doing push-ups after big plays for his defense on the sideline. That was an interesting look. And you were talking about, though, I think Tech, maybe if they wanted to be a thorn, well, they were definitely a thorn today. They got Georgia as one of their playmaking wideouts on the shelf for 2 quarters against LSU, and they threw a big-time scare into Georgia's potential up-tempo, high-impact offense with what happened to Swift.
And by the way, I know Jeff Collins likes a certain Atlanta-based restaurant establishment famous for waffles, but they also serve burgers as well. I'd actually be curious to know what Jeff Collins wants on his burger, because Georgia served him up a 50 burger today.
Probably ketchup and onions. That's it. Ketchup and onions. None of the good stuff. No cheese. No lettuce, tomato. By the way, our friend Mad Dog, you'll get a laugh out of this. I don't think our viewers can see it. But
yeah, so this is one of our buddies on Twitter. So he has put so Mad Dog here on Twitter has put a Georgia hat on Jeff Collins. He's pointing to that. I really do feel like the Georgia Tech rivalry has completely lost all of its juice. I feel like we need something to play for, these two schools. I feel like the Waffle House ought to be that. I feel like if Jeff Collins was a gentleman, if he was a true competitor, he would voluntarily say, I'm not eating at Waffle House again until I find a way to beat Georgia. I feel like this rivalry, there's no Paul Bunyan's axe, with all due respect to the Governor's Cup. There's no, Oaken Bucket, things like that. Somebody plays for a pig.
What about playing for a bronze Waffle House menu?
Yeah, I feel like that'd be a fine way to signify it, but I feel like that Jeff Collins, the least he could do as a competitor is say, I'm not going to Waffle House until I find a way to beat Georgia on the field.
Okay, this getting crazy, folks. This is like Keystone Cops right now. Auburn has matched Alabama's score 24-24, and then Jalen Waddle connects with Mac Jones for a 58-yard touchdown. This game is 31-24 at the half, and all semblance of Iron Bowl normalcy and defense is out the window.
It's not crazier than our Pella Windows Postgame Show, given the fact that I had Connor's phone, I've had Jeff's phone, now I'm going to hold my own phone, and we'll try to see if we can get a few more comments before we get out of here. Getting ready for the SEC Championship coming up in just 1 week's time. We're right back here in the city of Atlanta. And, Jeff, there was nothing that could happen today that was going to make me feel completely confident that Georgia would win the game, nor was there anything, barring a loss, that was going to make me feel like that Georgia couldn't win the game against LSU. So for the most part, I end this Saturday pretty much the same way that I started it, knowing that with a really good game, maybe a step up in level based on the way that Georgia has played for the last month or so, this is a game that Georgia can win. They're going to be a narrow underdog against LSU, and for Georgia fans who've been really worried about it, I think that's over-worry. I think that's too much anxiety. This is a game that Georgia can win. There's obviously a lot of reasons to think that Georgia has to play better than it has for a lot of this season. Honestly, I got nothing to be complaining about. It's a beautiful day. Georgia runs this state again, dominates this.
Today.
Yeah, it didn't rain today, dominates this field again. I'm really kind of a good mood about all this kind of stuff. I can't guarantee that Georgia wins next Saturday, but you better believe that Kirby Smart, the coach we just heard from, those players we just heard from, you better believe they feel like they have a chance of winning that game.
So I think we had multiple Kirby Smart children. I think at least one Kirby Smart child was carrying around a dry erase board with "We Run This State" all over Grant Field, his historic Bobby Dodd Stadium. I'm sure we get all those naming rights in there. But you saw Isaiah Wilson carrying him around. You saw Justin Schaefer carrying him around. You saw Richard LeCount III taking pictures with a bunch of yellow-bellied Tech fans, because that's what they were. They were yellow-bellied.
I saw a really good picture of LeCount at one point in time, kind of doing some of that kind of stuff.
I mean, you literally have Georgia. What is it? The number now is going to stretch. It's going to be 30 years since Georgia Tech was able to beat the Georgia Bulldogs at home.
Only 22.
Well, it's actually once in the last 30 years, I think the real number is. Yeah, because you had a streak that sort of predated the robbery that was 1999. So, one of the guys that I saw running around with a "We Run This State" sign was James Cook. And for me, that was incredibly poignant because Cook's a guy from Florida. And one of the things that Georgia has done here is sort of expanded its recruiting footprint. And the challenge for that is, for a guy like Cook, I don't think of Georgia Tech as one of the great rivalries in college football. There's a really good chance that prior to coming to UGA, Cook had never watched a clean old-fashioned hay, right? That's not a game he grew up watching. So there's a job, and I'll let you get in with your comment, but there's a job here of Georgia to ingrain those guys into a rivalry like this and explain to them why this matters. I'm sure Georgia-Florida means a lot to James Cook because he probably grew up around some Gators fans. Georgia Tech probably doesn't naturally mean quite as much. So to see him as happy as any Georgian about 52-7 here on this turf here today, that was kind of a cool moment to see the way these guys are being assimilated into a culture that has mattered to Georgia fans for decades, if not centuries.
Yeah, so a few things. I'm gonna make one snarky thing that maybe Brandon would like to hear, and I might stoop to that level. But
what do you say? That's not a compliment.
no, but you like it when we so number one, one might say, Brandon, that was James Cook enjoying what anyone can do against an ACC defense, like his brother Dalvin did, setting records for FSU. Second point I'll make is, folks, it was interesting because James Cook came out to the post-game media session, and besides the open locker rooms for last year, when James Cook had an open locker room environment there for the SEC championship game, that was the first time he met the media. And Kirby Smart's post-game comments was he called him a warrior. He said he doesn't complain. He just
Not a worrier, but a warrior.
Warrior. He goes out.
I'm a worrier. James Cook's a warrior.
He goes out there. He does his job. And then I'm going to just share a little bit with James Cook, because I've been talking to him for about 3 or 4 years. And it was remarkable how much more composed, mature, how much maturation I've seen in young James Cook through 2 seasons, 2 full regular seasons now in Athens, Georgia. He seems a lot more composed, a lot more comfortable himself in an interview setting, and I'm seeing some real maturity and growth there in James Cook.
I'll also add to that, Cook in motion as much as he was, at least in the first half of this game, I think that's a really fun weapon. When you look at these NFL teams who are having the most success right now, they're the teams that do a lot of pre-snap motion. Pre-snap motion is just one of the little wrinkles that I think the Georgia offense can use some more of. I think that Cook's a really good weapon to potentially do that with. I like to see that.
Well, and Jeff brought this point up earlier, Cook and Zamir White, they've seen time in games this year, but they've always it's always been either like James Cook's the only one on the field or Zamir White is the only one on the field. And defenses have known to key in on those guys because usually when you're putting them in there, you're assuming one of them that guy is going to be getting the ball. Yeah. Today, I think, was the first time we saw both those guys, both members of the 2018 Georgia recruiting class, on the field at the same time. And you saw some positive things where you couldn't really focus on either one of them. If you want to chase James Cook around from running from sideline to sideline, good luck. And because that's going to pull guys out of the box for Zamir White, and that's going to open things up for both of those guys going forward.
While the personnel's not an exact match, you know what it kind of reminded me of? It reminded me a little bit of what Jimbo did last week. And I like Jimbo Fisher as a coach. I like his offense. I like the fact that he has 2 backs on the field a pretty good bit. I wouldn't mind some of that Jimbo Fisher DNA kind of getting into the Georgia game plan a bit, especially if, I hate to even say it this way, but if somehow, some way, DeAndre Swift was less than fully 100% healthy, the idea of a couple backs in the game at one point in time together, I think that's a fun thing for Georgia fans and a difficult thing for opposing defenses to try to figure out a way to stop.
So, DeAndre Swift injury notwithstanding, are you more confident going into the LSU game after today, or less confident?
This game doesn't change my confidence whatsoever. I think that Georgia it's more than a puncher's chance. Whatever the phrase that's not quite they should win, but above puncher's chance, they're in a legitimate fight next week. LSU, here's the way I've said it before, and I'll say it again. LSU is just as scared of Georgia as Georgia is of LSU. This is one of those things where both sides will need to feel the other out. The idea that LSU struts into Atlanta next Saturday, I can promise you that's not the case whatsoever. So my confidence is what it should be. I expect it to be a close game that comes down to something late where Georgia has a chance to win. The Tech game doesn't change that one way or another because this, for the most part, is an inconsequential opponent at this stage of the rivalry. But I've always felt like this was a game that Georgia could win next Saturday, and I think LSU obviously sees a path to victory for itself there as well. I think both sides ought to have a little justifiable respect and maybe a bit of anxiety about some of the blemishes that both teams have shown this year popping up at the wrong time.
Well, I'm going to say my thoughts are not maybe totally in alignment with yours right now. I thought Georgia had a really great shot with LSU for reasons discussed: ball control, a leaky LSU defense, the way Georgia's defense and how its pressure and how its defenders, its back-end defenders can match up and make a Joe Burrow guy go about 6, 7, 8 plays down the field rather than 3 or 4. But the thing about this game, I don't come out of this game feeling as great about Georgia's chances anymore. I'm going to call what I see as a spade. You take 2 quarters away from George Pickens, that limits Georgia's ability to score 35 points in that ball game or score 31 points in that ball game. And if DeAndre Swift isn't anything less than 100%, that's a true worry there for Georgia fans against LSU. I think it turns, in my mind, a game that Georgia had every bit of a chance to win. It could be in that thing regardless of situation, circumstance, or scenario. Now I think this is a 1-score game where Georgia's going to have to play extremely well in order to beat LSU.
So you really think Pickens off the field for one half changes the complexion of the game that much? I mean, I hate to be
that's one one touchdown less Georgia can get against LSU across 4 quarters.
I mean, I'd give anything if Georgia would have targeted him 6 times in the first half that he would have played him. But that's not really been Georgia's history. For me, the absence of Pickens, while it's a nuisance and certainly an obstacle to overcome, it doesn't change my feeling about the game all that much.
I think the big thing is, so the Alabama game last year, the Alabama game in Mercedes, both those games in Mercedes-Benz, Georgia could not finish those games. I think it is imperative, absolutely imperative, with Pickens not going to be able to play in that first half in all likelihood, that Georgia comes out and starts next week. They don't have to score, 21, 28 points in the first half, but they absolutely cannot lose this game in the first half. They have to come out clicking and playing well, because in the third quarter this year, do you know how many points all season, all 12 games? Do you know how many points Power 5 opponents have scored on this Georgia team?
I know it's not a lot, but I don't know the exact number.
It is 3.
Wow. Yeah.
3 points, 0 touchdowns against Power 5 opponents in the third quarter this year.
Now, you can't outcoach the LSU staff at halftime, though. So that's a sharp coaching staff on both sides of the ball. So you're not going to outcoach them at the half. And I say that with all due respect to the Georgia coaches, but it just goes to show you how dominant Georgia has been coming back out of the locker room. Would you guys do me a favor? Pull up some comments here. Let's let the audience have a chance to have their final say before we get ready to go off the air here as a part of our Pella Windows Postgame Show. And while they're doing that, I'll say to you, for each of you who are part of this after every game, what a fun regular season it's been, all 12 of these, whether it be standing on fields for games not in Athens or being with at the UGA bookstore for the home games. Another incredible season. And to go back to something Connor said a moment ago, how does this change my feeling for the SEC championship game? It doesn't change that, but there is a sense of relief to say that, wow, Georgia once again was able to put an 11-1 season in the books now, the third consecutive year that Georgia will go 11-1 in a regular season. I realize it's a 12-game schedule now, where in previous eras it would have only been 11. But that in itself is an accomplishment. It's not the ultimate end goal, but there is a sense of relief of, wow, Georgia did figure a lot out, went through a month of November that folks had a lot of questions about, and found a way to get some really good wins. Connor, you just want to read a comment?
I do. Winston Mock and Kelly Cole both bring up in ways Tyler Simmons, who I think becomes maybe the most important player on Georgia's offense next week. He had a very nice game today. Made 2 really incredible catches. One of those went for a touchdown, both in tight coverage. He won there. Last week you see against A&M, he won in tight coverage. He is a guy who, a lot of fans, and you mentioned this earlier, have written him off. Simmons, we talked to him post-game. He says he's come on a little bit, gotten better, and he's always sort of kept the faith. And I think next week is a big chance in a stadium Tyler Simmons has quite a bit of history with, to sort of make a statement and say, hey, this could be my, it's going to be his last game, in all likelihood, going to be his last game in Mercedes-Benz Stadium. I think it's a chance for him to sort of remove the memory of Tyler Simmons was onside and sort of make a winning play for Georgia next week.
Jeff, you want to respond to that?
Certainly seems like Tyler Simmons is out of the shoulder brace, and he's able to be the full player he thought his 2019 season would be. I want to pull up.
Hold on before you. I want to say something about Simmons before you read a different comment. Hold on. Speaking as a fan here for a moment, and I realize that this is, maybe an emotional take post-game. Admittedly, I've had some skepticism about Simmons just given some of the moments he's had this year. He did win me back over today. That is a guy that I want to be a big part of the game plan. So maybe that's one thing with the Tech game that I do feel differently about going to next Saturday. I'm now a lot more eager to see how Georgia uses Tyler Simmons, because after having some admittedly down moments this year, and he was asked about that post-game, to see Simmons respond the way that he did today, I thought he made a beautiful catch towards the corner of the end zone early in the first half. To see him do some of those things, Simmons definitely won me over. You can read the comment now.
Yeah, there's a lot of nostalgia when you have Tyler Simmons getting a get-right touchdown against Georgia Tech, another get-right big play in the corner down here again, and also Charlie Warner getting his first touchdown. But I want to go to YouTube. Connor, I'm working in the YouTube lane. You can work in the Facebook lane. John Adams, I made a point earlier about and I didn't want to overkill the point. I just wanted to sell it and let it go down the road. But John Adams makes a point that, remember when we were writing about James Cook as a recruit, his mother, Sedell McGee, made a promise to him that he would make him the man that she thinks he could be, and John Adams brought that out. There was a promise to Cook's mom to make him the man she hoped he would be. Promise is being delivered. John Adams, thanks for reading and following our coverage and knowing exactly what that meant.
It's a real honor to have one of the founding fathers with us for what we're doing here today. Connor, how about you?
There are a lot of people on Facebook who want us to bring up other receivers as the number one leader on the hype train today. I thought Dominic Blaylock showed a lot of promising things. Obviously, he fumbled the kickoff or the punt, and that can't happen. But I do think it says a lot about him and where Kirby is with him that he put him back out there on punts after that, and Blaylock made up for it, had another big return after that, and he had a touchdown catch today. I know no one saw it because George Pickens was throwing a guy into a wall. But Blaylock has shown some impressive things as a wide receiver getting open.
He's here now. He's not a freshman. He's going to play his 13th game next Saturday. Blaylock is here. He's as much a receiver on this team as anybody is. You know, the idea of they're trying to figure out what they have in Dominic Blaylock. They know now Blaylock is as big a part of this thing as anyone is. I know that Landers also had a catch day as well. But I thought it was really cool to see Blaylock is just very comfortable in his own skin right now, a player that I want to see. We'll come back to Connor here in a moment. Jeff, how about you?
So, Connor, I'm sure you will permit me to say something impressive about Dominic Blaylock. You will allow this. I think fire and ice is Dominic Blaylock and George Pickens. I think George Pickens is the fire, Dominic Blaylock is the ice. And look at this, in his first year, big play Blaylock. Look at him. He's got a touchdown against Auburn. He's got a touchdown against Tech. He's got a touchdown against Florida. And quietly, he is a big play receiver for Georgia, and you just see him. It's almost like those Christmas lights that you try to get plugged in from last year. They're just fizzling, and you're seeing a little bit more out of Dominic Blaylock every week. And you know what's going to have to happen, folks, with Pickens watching and maybe trying to be nuclear loose for Georgia coming in for the second half and being the closer? You're going to have to see a lot of that good stuff from Tyler Simmons and Dominic Blaylock to weather that time until who I feel is Georgia's most explosive every down receiver, George Pickens, gets back in the ballgame.
And if you're looking to establish a personal brand for yourself, being a rivalry killer, playing big against Florida, Auburn, and Georgia Tech, there are worse brands to have for yourself as a UGA wide receiver. Connor, as part of kind of a rapid-fire thing, you had something else you wanted to say?
I don't.
You were laughing about something a minute ago.
Oh, I had a thought that's not safe for air.
Okay, well, let's don't do that then. How about, Jeff, a rapid-fire comment for you?
Brandon, are all your thoughts very safe for air and everything?
Of course. The only thoughts I have are safe for air thoughts. I'm always on broadcast mode.
So let's group poll this one right now. Compare this Georgia team heading into the SEC championship game compared to the previous years. The thing that jumps out to me is I remember Jake Fromm was playing his best football of his career. He even told me that this year during the season at SEC Media Days. He thought his best stretch of football was when he went through Florida, he went through Auburn, he went through Tech. I think last year against Tech he was 12 out of 15 with 5 touchdown passes, and then he goes into the Alabama game. I think that's what's different about this football team right now. The defense is much stronger, but the offense, it leaves a little to be desired.
Yeah, and there was some nervousness about battling the Alabama offense last year. So in a lot of ways, the storylines going into LSU this upcoming Saturday feel very similar. I think Georgia fans thought they had more of a backstory with Alabama than they do with LSU. But in terms of the kind of team you're trying to stop, the kind of team you're trying to beat, it really isn't all that different.
Just hear me all the way out on this. I am more confident about this Georgia team going into the SEC championship game than I was in 2017, but less confident than I was in 2018.
That's really interesting to hear. It's one of those things that we'll have a lot of time to talk about here this week. Anybody got a final comment from someone that's not standing here right now in front of the camera?
John West, Waffle House, boys. Okay.
Hey, listen, if it would be appropriate as a way to celebrate this one for sure.
So Joe Brummel says Bama was favored by 13 points against Georgia heading into that game.
LSU's not going to be anywhere near that big of a favorite. I know there was a Caesars Palace line that had them favored by 3.5. I think the honest line is going to be bigger than that. If I had to guess, I think it's about a touchdown or so.
I would say 6.5. Yeah. It opens as that, probably gets bet up to 7 right away, and then we'll see where it settles over the course of the week.
I do think Vegas and the betting community at large likes LSU better than Georgia right now, and that's going to obviously have an impact on the line. But this is not a 2-touchdown number.
So, one of the things, I have a thought that's I'm kind of tying together some points here on Facebook, but I thought it was interesting how Kirby said doubtful for the bowl game for Cager, because I think you're never going to see this Georgia offense as it could have been. You see all the forces together. If Georgia ever had a developed Pickens and a developed Blaylock going together now with maybe Demetrius Robertson getting better, Tyler Simmons showing health, and then you drop Cager into that mix, that would be a formidable group going into the LSU SEC championship game. But I know there's some Disney dogs out there. There's always some dog dreamers out there. What if Georgia can keep playing meaningful football games down the stretch, and maybe mid-January, early January, Cager becomes an issue where he could play for this team again?
Yeah, I thought the same thing. Of course, the Coastal elites in the media last thing that needs more pats on the back, but I did think it was a good job. It took 2 passes at the Cager question in the post-game press conference to get Smart to say that he'd be doubtful for a bowl game. And I think, Jeff, the point you bring up is a good one. If this is the Orange Bowl against Miami, Lawrence Cager's not playing.
Virginia.
Yeah, I'm sorry. But against Virginia, Cager. Yeah, I don't know. Cager's not. I was just thinking about the city where it's going to be played. Cager's not going to play in that game. But if you could stretch this thing middle of January, is there a chance you rethink it? Even in that point in time, I think it's a long shot that Cager would play. But by saying doubtful, if Georgia does play for a national championship, I guess at least keeps that door open, maybe just slightly ajar.
Moving away from Cager, because we haven't I don't think talked about them as much as they deserve. What if the defense is this good?
Yeah, it's a great question.
For all the questions and concerns about the offense, and yes, the offense has not been great this year, what if this defense is actually that good? Because we saw Ohio State today give up over 300 passing yards to Michigan. Now, Michigan lost again as someone told you to stay away from that game on a certain show. But I wonder, what if this defense is that good? They don't give up a lot of big plays. I think that is a huge key, especially against LSU next week. Jeff mentioned it, just about everybody in the secondary. There's one guy next week who I think needs to have a huge game, and that is Mark Webb. Mark Webb, I think, is going to be tasked, especially on rushing downs, with covering Clyde Edwards-Helaire. We have said time and time again, you are not beating this Georgia team if you do not run the football on them. That has just been proven time and time again. I think if Georgia, and I have staked my claim to this, as great as Joe Burrow is, I do not think he is the most important player for this LSU team in slowing him down. I think if Georgia can slow down Clyde Edwards-Helaire, which Auburn could not, and that is why Auburn lost that game, if Georgia contains and corrals Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I feel very, very good about Georgia's chances next week.
And we'll get ready to wrap up here. I think Connor's bringing up a pretty good point. If you want to make the comparison between the 2019 defense and the 2017 defense, one area in which the 2019, I believe, is superior is I did think the 2017 defense had a vulnerability. I won't go so far as to say it was a weakness, but a vulnerability in the secondary. I mean, I hate to bring up a bad memory, but the fact they gave up a second and 26 for a game-winning touchdown kind of fit with the narrative of that season where we saw that Georgia defense give up some big pass plays throughout the year. This Georgia defense, by comparison, doesn't have the same kind of vulnerability. There really is no weakness in the linebackers, and heading into the secondary. Now, do I agree with some of the commenters who said you have to be more disruptive against a team like LSU? That's probably true to a degree. But in terms of doing what the group's done all year long, they've benefited from not playing a lot of great quarterbacks, and in some cases not even playing starter-level quarterbacks. But I think you've seen enough in tough situations to know, no, this defense still got the job done when it needed to. I think Connor's right about this. I think the Georgia defense goes into next Saturday's game as just as much of a catalyst for its team's success as the vaunted LSU offense does for its team's success.
So I've got a thought, and it's kind of, I'm going to hunker down a little bit around Connor's point he made and kind of use that as a launch point here. The thinking man's way to look at the LSU-Georgia matchup this week is I always had two numbers in my mind. I was struggling between two numbers. It was the number that Georgia's defense, to echo your point, really is that good. I think, Connor, correct my math, but the most points anybody scored against Georgia is 20. That was in an overtime game.
Overtime and a defensive touchdown to get that.
So you had 17 in regulation, but actually 13 scored on the Georgia defense. Has any team scored more than 13 on Georgia this year? Florida. And they had 17 points, correct?
Yes.
So what if Georgia's defense is that good? Because here's what I'm hovering around. There's two numbers. There's the way Georgia wins this game by getting to 31 points, or the way Georgia wins this game by holding LSU under 20.
That's not going to happen.
What if it does?
Maybe Georgia's defense is that good.
They gave up 40 to Auburn in 2017 and came back and held them to 7 in that SEC championship game. Now, Kerryon Johnson didn't play a whole lot in that second game. But again, I think it's on the table. Would you be shocked? So would you be shocked if we are standing in Mercedes-Benz at 7:30 next Saturday and the score is Georgia 24, LSU 13?
I'd be very shocked with that. I think Georgia wins, and we've all said a version of this. It looks like 28-27, 27-26. I don't see Georgia winning 42-35, nor do I see them winning 13-10. If it becomes a game where the LSU offense is doing what it's doing, I don't think Georgia keeps pace with that. If it's the kind of game where the Georgia defense has to go out there and be as stingy as it's been all season long, that to me is asking too much from that group. The Georgia win, to me, always has kind of felt like you score a little bit more points than you're used to seeing Georgia score against a Power 5 defense, and you hold LSU pretty significantly below its season average. You're asking both groups to do a little bit more than maybe the average person thinks they can. Yeah, the do more mantra kind of coming back full circle. In fact, that's probably a good way to end it. The same way we started July in the SEC Media Days, we'll finish it here for the regular season anyway, but there is a lot of football still to go. So this week at DogNation.com, it's going to be an incredible week. We have an extra show every single day next week. We'll do that at 9, our Road to Atlanta, presented by friends at Kroger. We'll kind of cover the day's worth of events on both campuses in Athens and Baton Rouge. Of course, we're going to have a big Marlowe's event coming up on Thursday. We'll be live in downtown Atlanta on Friday, the day before the SEC championship game. I can say this without hesitation and without an excessive amount of hype. These are the moments that we live for, building up towards a gigantic football game at Mercedes-Benz Stadium between Georgia and LSU. How does Georgia get it done? Unraveling that mystery is going to make this week so much fun. Thank you for being a part of our Pella Windows Postgame Show here today from Georgia Tech. Great to see the Dogs running this state again, but more business to take care of than that for right now. Jeff Sintel, quick final thought from you.
It's here. I mean, Georgia's the balance sheet of their season was get to the SEC championship game, win the SEC championship game, move forward from that. No one thought it was going to get there to this way, but they're back again.
Connor Riley, how about a final thought from you?
Jeff Collins, no hash browns for you, and excited for next week.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Hey, thanks to all of you. Huge thanks to Pella Window and Door. They love this kind of stuff there as well. They love being able to be a part of a fun conversation on this and a fun conclusion of the season that's only just getting going as the calendar turns to December. Enjoy the rest of your Thanksgiving weekend. Spend it with family and friends. I'll see you back Monday morning for Dog Nation Daily. We will look forward to the ride that is to come. We'll talk to you then here on the Dog Nation video channels.